Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our inaugural Meet the Leaders. Our objective in this program is to provide Folsom business with a front row seat to engage with leaders and topics that impact our community. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Intel, and our platinum sponsors, Kaiser and Berger Physical Therapy, and of course, our restaurant partner, Land Ocean. We appreciate your support. Today's format will include a presentation followed by a Q&A session. Today's inaugural session features the esteemed John McGinness, retired sheriff of Sacramento County and currently a popular host of the John McGinness Show on top-rated KFBK radio. John's law enforcement background has run the full gamut in every service area of the department, from detective to trainer and department spokesperson, culminating with his election as sheriff in 2006. He's an adjunct professor of criminal justice, communications, leadership, and professional studies with California State University, Sacramento. As all of the fans of his radio show know, John is a candid, knowledgeable host. He brings his professionalism and judgment to offer insight on the situations in the realm of public safety that impact our lives the most. On a personal note, John and I share probably a lot of similar things, but one thing is neither one of us can handle technology very well. John lives in Folsom with his wife, Peggy, and their 2 children. We are really pleased, and please join me in welcoming John McGinness. John?
Thanks, Joe, very much. Thanks, everyone, for being involved here. And by the way, Joe, just to clarify, you are a technology giant compared to me, because I have no aptitude or, frankly, appreciation, but I sure appreciate those who do have the ability to crack the code with technology. And it's great to be with you. I'm very happy to see that the Chamber is thriving, that the business community is supportive of one another. We are in a period of time, I think, in which there is just a kind of a bizarre element of apathy towards business. The state of California for years has been ranked as the least business-friendly state in the union. And that's frankly a pathetic commentary, I think. And there have been some things in recent years, while they didn't exactly target the business community, it has compromised the ability of many especially in small business operation to make a living, to be effective, to actually maintain their function as local business providers, service providers, and providers of merchandise. And going back a few years now, there are some things I'd love to see at some point revisited. I don't know when that might happen, quite frankly, because it's going to take a change in attitudes and philosophies. And I suppose, as so oftentimes is the case, I look back to a period of time in which Californians became very, very frustrated with the lack of consequences for criminal behavior way back when, in the 1990s. And lo and behold, a couple of people got together and worked on something known as 3 strikes and you're out. It was cutting edge philosophy and attitude in support of criminal justice in the nation. And it worked very effectively. The reality is crime statistics plummeted as a result of 3 strikes and you're out. That was a product of too many tragedies, frankly, in which the judiciary and the legislative branch of government, and frankly, the executive branch of government in California, was not taking that seriously. So it was actually the voters, the business leaders in the state of California, and individuals who regrettably had been adversely affected by crime and violence that brought this to the fore and changed the course of California's history. Well, over the last several years, we have seen a profound erosion of that very value and respect that has contributed to a safer, frankly, more productive environment in which people could live and thrive and do well in the state. And it goes back a few years now to actually 2014, when the voters of the state of California passed the first proposition that I think had extraordinarily detrimental effects, especially to the business community, but across the full spectrum in California. That very first one that went to the voters was Proposition 47. I'm sure you've talked about it in the past, but just to kind of remind you of what it has done, specifically to retail in California. Prior to the passage of Proposition 47, there were a couple of special circumstances, kinds of consequences for criminal behavior. If a person had committed theft in the past, been convicted of that theft, and actually served any time at all, even a night in jail, they would be subject to a California Penal Code section that no longer exists as a result of Prop 47. And that is ironically Section 666, which is theft with a prior, even petty theft with a prior, that would make that subsequent theft a felony. Now, it was not recklessly administered. Kids who engaged in a minor shoplift incident as juveniles or as young adults even, and then reoffended later on, were not subject necessarily to that. There was discretion on the part, there was prosecutorial discretion on the part of the DA, as well as judicial discretion on the part of the court to decide if they wanted to treat that as a felony. But it was, I think, a pretty significant deterrent to people making a life of preying on others, especially retail business operators. So that's gone, that's lost. There was also, and in fact, it still exists in statute, but the circumstances, the terms of violating this law have changed. We think of two of the most improperly used terms, I think, in common conversation are robbery or robbed or burglary. And just to kind of clarify what that means. By the way, your house cannot be robbed. You can be robbed in your house, but robbery is the taking of property from the person of another by means of force or fear. So it's when somebody is compelled to give up something that is either theirs or that they have in their control. For example, obviously a store clerk who has responsibility for the cash in the till. If somebody threatens them with a gun or a knife or just suggestion of great bodily harm and force them to surrender that money, even though it's not theirs, that is a robbery. Burglary is when a person enters a lockable structure. Doesn't even have to be locked, but a lockable structure for the purpose of, with the intention of committing theft or some other felony. And so we had for years something known as commercial burglary. And that statute again still exists, but I'll tell you how it's changed. That means that even if you walk into a business that's wide open, they've got searchlights, flags, banners, balloons saying they're wide open, please come in. So there's no force involved. But a person enters that business or a home or a garage or any lockable structure with the intention of stealing. They have committed a burglary, which was a felony, subject to harsh consequences under California law. Well, that went away largely. The felony statute went away. So if you enter a retail business with some kind of a booster device or some evidence to show that, yes, that was your intention when you entered, notwithstanding the fact that the business is open, that your intention was to steal merchandise from that store, that retail business, then you have, prior to the passage of Prop 47, you had committed a felony burglary, a commercial burglary. The circumstances still hold. In other words, the elements still hold on that, where the prosecution has to prove the intent on the part of the person who commits that crime, but it's now a misdemeanor unless it gets to the point of grand theft. So as it stands now, as a result of Proposition 47, and I know this is affecting retailers up and down the state of California, it is an overwhelming adverse impact. But a person can walk into a retail business of any size, a mom and pop store on Sutter Street, or a big box store, Home Depot, Lowe's, and steal $949 worth of merchandise every single day of the year, every day, 365 days a year. And they have never committed a felony, and they will not see 1 minute in custody for that. That is a sad reality. Now, do I want to see people tormented or subject to horrible consequences for their indiscretions? Well, frankly, I'm okay with it in some cases, but more significantly, what has that predictably done to operating retail businesses in the state of California? It's been a dramatic adverse impact. This is in a period of time in which obviously brick and mortar stores are having extraordinary concerns anyway. So I think that's something, well, it's lost. By the way, this was, the voters took this course of action, but they did so with an abundance of encouragement from the California legislature, the governor at the time, the attorney general at the time. And so the consequences have frankly been, I think, overwhelming. I want to really address how it's affect retail in the state. And I know many of you are aware of this. And if you just kind of look at it from a logical perspective in terms of what it would reasonably, foreseeably do to retail business, is very clear. There have been consequences that have gone far beyond that. Possession of a date rape drug, for example, no longer a felony in California. Possession of methamphetamine, as long as it's for personal use, no longer a felony in the state of California. What's the threshold to take it from misdemeanor to felony? It's got to be for commercial, for resale. You got to be in possession for sales, which makes it a felony, but there's no quantity threshold. So literally within days of the passage of Proposition 47 in Fresno County, a man was stopped with an entire trunkload of methamphetamine. Historically, that would be a very easy possession for sales of methamphetamine, and it would bring a prison term. By the way, this is a substance that unto itself is extraordinarily destructive. It's not only dangerous for the person that consumes it, but it is bad for the environment. It destroys plumbing fixtures, underground water supplies. Oftentimes people cook this in budget hotels, and they absolutely destroy all the infrastructure in the hotels when they do so. In addition to that is one drug, one of probably one of several, but one for certain, that you can actually articulate a phenomenon that will come from people using it. That phenomenon is something I refer to as methamphetamine paranoia, where somebody consumes methamphetamine over a protracted period of time, and for whatever reason, they see somebody who poses no threat to their safety whatsoever, but they perceive otherwise. Their perception is that that person is there to harm them, they're coming after them, and therefore they attack them, they kill them. There's a period of time in Sacramento County where we had about a dozen homicides in the course of just a little over a year, so virtually one a month if you break it down that way, that was influenced by somebody who had no axe to grind in reality with the person they killed, but they did so because they had been using methamphetamine for a long period of time, and they believed, they perceived this person as a threat to them. It's in a bizarre paranoia that is predictably going to come from protracted use of methamphetamine. So this is a big collection of adverse impacts that we have foisted upon the state of California. And you can see how this also has an adverse impact on people's ability to run their businesses effectively. Not long after that, we had Proposition 57 passed. Again, this was one that the members of the legislature, significant leaders therein, as well as at the time Governor Brown and Attorney General by the name of Kamala Harris, you may have heard of her, supported this, saying that this would keep the most hardened criminals in custody. Well, what it did is create a path for early release from custody in the state prison system for people who had engaged and been convicted of crimes that were not on a specific enumerated list in the California Penal Code that identified them as violent crimes. So in everyday parlance, the terminology that you and I use on the street, if you look at Webster's dictionary, crimes that would certainly qualify as violent, such as rape of the unconscious, elder abuse, domestic violence, which has within it the term violence, none of those are violent crimes. They're not enumerated specifically in Section 667B of the California Penal Code. Therefore, they're not violent crimes. In addition to that, you have people assaulted with weapons that do not have automatic capacity. Therefore, it's a lesser crime. Doesn't come out of the heading. Not in every case would that come out of the heading of a violent crime. So we have really, truly changed the course of things in terms of who is likely to be in custody in the state of California, notwithstanding evidence of significant criminal conduct. And there are a number of resources you can check on this. The district attorney in Sacramento County actually does a good job on their website, showing cases that have been locally prosecuted in which the offenders are sentenced to prison time, but released early under Proposition 57 because those crimes did not specifically rest in that penal code section that established them as violent crimes. So what Proposition 57 did was provide a path to early release from custody for a whole host of crimes. Again, many of which would be things, conduct that you and I would certainly consider abundantly violent. Think about this for a moment. During the time that this all took place, in fact, literally on the ballot when Proposition 57 passed, there was a judge recalled, a Superior Court judge recalled in Santa Clara County. And that was a judge who had presided over the case of a young man by the name of Brock Turner. Brock Turner was the Stanford swimmer who actually sexually violated an inebriated woman adjacent to the Stanford campus. And I had occasion to read her victim impact statement, and it's absolutely heart-wrenching. The unfathomable treatment that he foisted upon her, and she acknowledged the fact that she engaged in reckless conduct because she allowed herself to be overserved and pass out. Well, that should never be a pass for anybody, not by any stretch of the imagination. But he behaved accordingly, and he was sentenced to 6 months in county jail for that by this particular Superior Court judge in Santa Clara County. Now, the law being the way it is in the state of California, he's going to get good time credit, half-time credit, that reduces that sentence from 6 months down to 3 months. That's 90 days. So think about this in terms that really kind of, at least for me, maybe for many of you, drive the point home. I still think about my days as a youngster in school, and I think about how fast that period of time from Memorial Day to Labor Day went, the old traditional summer vacation. That's 90 days. That's how much time Brock Turner spent in custody for violating the person in the most intimate, egregious way one could imagine of another human being who had done nothing more than allowed herself to consume too much alcohol and pass out. Proposition 57 passed in Santa Clara County, ironically by a wide margin, on the same ballot where that judge who imposed that sentence was ousted from office in a recall. So I think from the chamber perspective, the extent to which the information can get out is not a matter of hardcore partisan ideology, but rather an educational and informative effort to let the people know. And of course, you are all people who have a vested interest in this wonderful community. And so the extent to which you can help really truly craft that message and get it out to people. Don't believe what others are telling you, because you did have very powerful, very influential people, a popular 4-term governor of the state of California who put his own capital, literally put millions of dollars into this Proposition 57 campaign to affect the outcome of that election. And I'll tell you what makes it even worse. And as business people, you'll understand this, appreciate this. We have pushed an overwhelming number of inmates out of the institutions in California state prisons as a result of this. The inmate population is way down, way down. But guess what? The budget for the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation has gone up by 10%. So it makes no sense. Any cost savings to be realized from that just has been absorbed through, I suppose, inefficiency. And it's not a knock on the people who run the institutions and have a very difficult job dealing with the most egregious among society, but rather the administrative oversight of an agency you think about is incredibly poorly named, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, because neither one of those things take place in a California prison. That's just absolute regrettable truth. So what has happened more recently? What's going on right now in real time in terms of things that can have an impact on the business community and members of this chamber? Again, it looks as though people in Sacramento, referring to the legislature, are looking for ways to make it more difficult for entrepreneurs to do business. The latest is Assembly Bill 1085 by Evan Lowe, a Bay Area Assembly member, that would prohibit, if it becomes law, will prohibit the display of boys and girls or boys or girls merchandise, be it clothing or toys or anything else in a retail store. So if you think about it, if you're rushing to go to a retail store to make a purchase for a 4-year-old boy's birthday party or a 5-year-old girl's birthday party, and you might want to have some idea as to where to find merchandise that would typically, doesn't have to be, but typically be associated with a 4-year-old boy or a 5-year-old girl. You want to do it in a timely way. Somebody like me who hates, I don't shop, I buy things, but I hate to shop. And we already acknowledged the fact that I don't do technology. So if I'm going to buy things, I have to go into a retail store and support them and make that purchase. So when you're trying desperately to make your business operate, you're trying to keep things functioning, and to have the state law, the state of California and the legislature therein create a law that tells you how you may display merchandise. The only concern there should be how the most effective way for those retailers to display that merchandise in a way that will increase the likelihood that it gets purchased, right? And by the way, that purchase creates a benefit for the public coffers that it seems to me the legislature and all in government should embrace. But that regrettably is not the case. But it's a reality in terms of where we are. And when you hear about some of these things, you might think that's absurd, that will never happen. But I'll just caution you, in the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, there have been some crazy ideas that have been floated out. And guess what? They're now law. And I think a lot of people, myself included, scoffed at the idea that some of these things could ever take place. But now we're living with the consequences of it in real time. So I really, truly believe, and by the way, the good news on this AB 1085 is that it would only apply to businesses that employ 500 people or more. And by the way, there's a daily fine on that of $1,000. That's what they proposed. So we have a set of circumstances in which we're turning a blind eye to all sorts of unlawful behavior that has a direct and profound adverse impact on the population. We're not imposing consequences for that. But if some retailer has the capacity, the audacity, I should say, to display toys or clothing that typically apply to a young boy or a young girl, a young man or young woman, they would be in violation of this law and would be fined accordingly. So the nonsense associated with this is just, it absolutely escapes me. And by the way, just to be abundantly clear, if there's a young girl that likes to play with trucks and balls and bats and army men, okay, I think that's absolutely wonderful. Vice versa, there's a young boy that likes to play with dolls or easy bake ovens or that sort of thing, I think that's absolutely fine. But recognizing the fact that retailers probably have a pretty good grip as to what group is more likely to be represented by a certain type of merchandise, let them make that decision. And if, by the way, if they choose to consolidate all of them together and that's their business model, God bless them. I hope it works for them. But the idea that somebody in Sacramento is telling people in all corners of the state, or will if this becomes law, how they may display merchandise in their retail store that's already struggling to survive is just, I can't quite fathom how that seems like a good course of rational conduct to take. So a couple of other things I like to look at, just different trends across the country to see what we may find happening here across the country and frankly within the state of California. A couple of things in the last few days, just this week, in the suburb of Chicago known as Evanston, Illinois, not too terribly far from where I was born, by the way. The city council there has actually passed a new law that will give provide money to Black residents of the city of Evanston, African Americans who reside in the city of Evanston, under the form of reparations. And there's a specific funding mechanism on this. It comes from a 3% tax on recreational cannabis. So again, a lot of these things you can look at and say it's never going to affect my life, but it does. I think the potential is truly there. I can absolutely guarantee you, there's not a lot I can guarantee you, but I can guarantee you that I will never be involved in the purchase of cannabis products anywhere, certainly not in Evanston, Illinois. So it'd be very easy to shrug it off and say it's not going to affect my life. But the wrongfulness of that, think about it. You have people who make a purchase decision, and people who may or may not have ever done anything untoward to anybody in their life. You may have people who were involved, possibly, probably not likely, but possibly involved in eradicating some of the old traditions in the city of Evanston, which, by the way, I neglected to mention, part of the reason they justify the reparations, there was a period of time in which Black people were not allowed to own real estate or operate businesses in certain geographical sections of Evanston, which is egregious. It's absolutely reprehensible. That never, ever, ever should have been the case. Shame on anybody who thought that was a good idea. But the law has changed as far back as 1969. So for 51 years, the city of Evanston has gone on a different path. And the idea of forcing a penalty on people, and it may sound ironic, I'm not an advocate for cannabis usage, certainly not THC. There are other cannabis products I think actually may have some benefit, but that's my own issue. And I would still defend against taxing people who make that purchase to right some wrong that they overwhelmingly the overwhelming likelihood is they had no part in. In fact, again, the possibility is some of them may have made significant efforts to end that old practice. There were communities in Sacramento, Land Park and Curtis Park, both had language in their CC&Rs that prohibited Black property ownership and residency, as well as Asian ownership and residency. In the vast majority of Land Park, and I think all of Curtis Park, back in the 1950s and 60s, that recently. So yes, there's shameful examples of things that we have done in different parts of the country. I'm sure that's played out in many, many places across the country. But those issues have been corrected now, and the idea of forcing a penalty, a financial penalty, on somebody who has never engaged in that practice, never, and would never support it, would never want anything to do with it, and may possibly work to stop that, I think is just absolutely wrongheaded. And it kind of suggests to me there's a possibility that there may be more of this on the horizon rather than less. One final example of a jurisdiction, the city of Oakland, California, has just agreed to, effectively, it's a basic guaranteed income. It's $500 a month for a period of 18 months. It's somewhat similar, in fact, very similar to what Stockton did. $500 a month to the lowest income earners, the most poverty-stricken people in the city of Oakland. And there's another catch. You would think if there's a catch in terms of what you may do with the proceeds, maybe you have to take some kind of financial education curriculum, or perhaps life guidance to help people navigate the chart of their life, to the course of their life, I should say, to make for a better future for themselves and their families. Now, there's no strings attached whatsoever, none, in terms of those people who get the money, $500 a month. None. They can spend it on whatever they want. They can literally get the $500 on a monthly basis for 18 months and go straight to the tattoo parlor, the dispensary, the piercing shop, with the racetrack, the casino, whatever it is they choose to do. No restrictions whatsoever. There is no accountability, no sharing of guidance or counsel in terms of how to manage affairs. None of that's in play in this. The only criteria is you must be a person of color or a Native American. So it's kind of an indicator, I think, of where some people want to see the country go, and I find it to be disturbing. Another thing, and I'm sure many business operators could understand and relate to this. We had the PPP that rolled out last year, of course, to the payroll protection plan that put business operators in a position where they could avail themselves of federal money. And I think the fundamental idea was a good one. But regrettably, like everything else, there's no strings attached to it. You have people who never lost a nickel in income, not one nickel. They get those monies, and they have no demand, no expectation that they pay them back. And as I happen to have a corporation myself, and I've had my own account as well as a number of accountants in the office building where I am that go out of their way to tell me I should have done that. I should have taken it because it's free money. Well, I'm still ideologically opposed to that. But at the same time, I understand how people look at that and say, wait a minute, if Washington's going to be sending out this money to people, what I believe is a very reckless manner, without accountability, without any logic associated with it, then if I don't take it, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to do something else with it? Are they going to do something smart with it? I have a 27-year-old daughter who got a check from the federal government last year for $1,200. And she calls me and says, what do I do? I don't need the money. She's got a pretty nice little investment portfolio. She's got a good job. She's earns decent income, not great, but decent. And she never lost one nickel through the pandemic. So I said, what do you think? What do you want to do? She said, I kind of feel like I should send it back. And I said, I understand that, but you think they will do something particularly wise with that if you send it back? And the conclusion, of course, is no. So I encouraged her to keep it and invest it, just as a lot of my accountant friends are telling me how wrong-headed I was to not take the PPP money. And I understand business operators across the spectrum have to make that decision, and I understand the logic that goes with that. But it does suggest to me that we're kind of moving into an environment where there is an acceptance of, and there's a justification of, taking without really legitimately earning. And I don't think that bodes well for the future. In the case of Oakland, I think the people who avail themselves of this $500 a month for 18 months, first of all, obviously nobody can make a living on that. But I think they will be worse off. My prediction is they will be worse off in 18 months than they are when it starts. We also have cases of states and cities and counties across the nation who will have the opportunity to get a significant amount of money out of the pandemic relief bill. And I completely and totally understand that. How the leadership in these jurisdictions are thinking to themselves, just like in my daughter's case, it makes no sense to give it back to the federal government because it's not as though they're going to do something better with it. So all of this comes to really truly suggest to me that we need to have a greater degree of respect for resources and how resources are acquired. And I would really hope, truly do my best to influence people to be aware of what is being considered, what's being promulgated out of the legislature in California and frankly in states across the nation and the federal government from Congress to see what kinds of things are changing on the horizon and how over time, I think we are suffering through a series of decisions, bad action that have that really truly are not serving our purpose as well. So information, knowledge, and sharing of that knowledge, I think, is the best resource there. I don't want to end on a downer note. So I'm going to tell you something that I think might give you hope. As recently as last November in the California election cycle, the California ballot, we had a couple of options that came out, I think, very, very favorably. And so it tells me that when people understand, so if the politicians call something like Proposition 47, the Safe Neighborhoods and Safe Schools Act, which is just to my way, I don't know how they could possibly, in their wildest dreams, identify it as the Safe Neighborhoods and Safe Schools Act. Literally the day after Proposition 47 passed, a young woman down in northern Los Angeles County, Santa Clarita, was waiting for a bus to go to school adjacent to another public school in a residential neighborhood when she was frankly kidnapped and sexually violated by a person who would have been in custody, but for the fact he was released that morning, the day after Prop 47 passed, because it was retroactive. Immediately he had to be released because he was guilty, it was in custody for commercial burglary. No longer did that stand. So a man by the name of Guillermo was released from the Los Angeles County Jail, Wayside Jail, and went into that neighborhood adjacent to a school and committed that egregious crime, left her for dead. But they had the audacity to call that the Safe Neighborhoods and Safe Schools Act. That influenced the population, I think, in terms of how they voted. Well, again, last November's ballot, when there was a couple of very, very clear messages, the very blue state of California rejected affirmative action, racial quotas in hiring and education. And I think that's a significant message. The state of California also rejected the elimination of cash bail, because I think they understood that. They had the capacity to understand, no, there are some people who really, truly should be held in custody until their matter is adjudicated, or if they're released on bond. And in addition to that, the voters of the state of California supported the independent contractor industry, the Uber and Lyft program. So this seems to fly in the face of clearly what the leadership within the state wanted, and I think what many across the country would perceive California as going in the opposite direction. So I think when the message is clear, when it's very, very simply communicated and people can make an informed decision, they're likely to do those things that probably would enhance the potential for people doing business and enjoying their lives in the state of California. So with that, if anybody has a question or a comment or criticism, I'd be happy to take it.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So we do have a few questions. The first one is, briefly, what is your thought around state-run versus privately owned jails or prisons, and which do you feel is best for Folsom?
I think there's a tremendous benefit to be had from privately run jails and prisons. Obviously, when you put a profit motive into it, a profit and loss statement into it, it does allow for for business decisions, meaning the bottom line, to influence to an inappropriate degree the way people are treated. But there still could be inspections. Oversight.
Are you trying? You know, you have to move your feet kind of like her. I forget, what did Ma say? Remember she looked up something? Bend down and kind of walk a little.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. Were you able to hear me?
Go ahead. I'm not sure what that was either. Go ahead, John. Sorry.
Okay, I think honestly, there is a place for privately run jails and prisons. I think there is a place for it. I think there should still be public oversight of a business of that nature, because the profit incentive could compromise the manner in which human beings are treated. And regardless of what people have done, they're still human beings, and there's an obligation to provide them with the necessities of life: nutrition, shelter, and medicine. And so that has to be done properly. They have to be treated humanely. The 8th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. So the resources are in place to provide for the successful operation of private institutions, to not entirely, not to eliminate public prisons and jails, but to help to some degree. and maybe even identify a path through which some real, legitimate, true rehabilitation could take place. Because what we do now, currently in the state of California, is we warehouse people in custody with like-minded people, others who have gotten themselves in trouble for a period of time, and then they're released. And to believe that they're going to come out of that experience any better off, any more prepared to live a productive life and not prey on other people, I think is a fallacy. So if under the right circumstances, yes, I think there is room for it. The California legislature has effectively prohibited that, so it's not an option at this juncture. But I regret the fact that certainly a hybrid model couldn't have been considered, especially if you think about the capacity for some organizations, people who have done tremendous things in turning people's lives around, people who have helped folks rehabilitate through all sorts of addictive behavior, anger management, other things that land people in custody. I think there's a potential there, and I regret the fact that it's not an option.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Next question. There was a recent statewide proposition that would have reformed Props 47 and 57 in a favorable way to businesses. Can you comment on why it was failed? And if recalled correctly, it was defeated pretty handily by the voters.
It was Proposition 20, which full disclosure, I was part of the committee and contributed financially to it. The problem is we contributed all we could financially and others contributed a lot more. And so we were just significantly outspent. It also was opposed by the current and former governor, the former and former attorney generals. And it was, again, the suggestion was that there was no need to incarcerate people for some of these offenses and that programs would work better. Well, ironically, part of their message was correct. I think programs would go a long way. If we had people serving a sentence, and I've never been accused of being a bleeding heart, but if you have somebody who's perhaps the second, third, or even fourth generation member of a family that has only known lawlessness, perhaps their grandparents were actively involved in violent street gangs. They've never learned. They never had the nurture or direction or guidance that I would venture to bet all of us had as kids, and all of us have provided to our own kids to encourage them to take the right courses of action and behave in a certain way, even if nothing more than providing a good role model. When you have people, such a large segment of society that has never had that benefit, if they're going to be locked up for something anyway, why not expose them to an indoctrination, if you will, or an education that would help prepare them to survive in society? And that was part of what I wanted to see included in Prop 20. I'm not ready to give up on this. I hope there will be an opportunity in the future. I hope there'll be a capacity on the part of the general public. I'm convinced, for some of the reasons I just shared today, more than ever, that part of what we have to do is make the message exceedingly simple. Because as you look at the manner in which these ballot measures are wordsmithed, I do this for a living, and I read through these ballot measures, and I think, my God, what? I have to go back and revisit the first line to see what is it we're trying to accomplish. That's not by happenstance. That's done by design. And so my hope is that as we move forward and more people have an opportunity to be informed as to what's going on, more conversations take place like the good people that are gathered in this program today, and hopefully in very, very short order in person, in real life. And then take that message out from that point and share it with a greater community. I believe there's hope that we could really truly inform the public. So when they read a ballot measure that says that you're going to basically forgive a whole lot of criminal behavior that has a demonstrated history of destroying communities, that cannot be called the Safe Neighborhoods and Safe Schools Act. By the way, the responsibility for that summary and title on a ballot measure is that of the Attorney General of the state of California. And so that is a partisan office. And the last several people in that office have been extraordinarily partisan. You had the person who was between terms as governor, Jerry Brown, who was Attorney General, obviously, for a period of time. And he is, love him or hate him or anything in between, he is overtly political. And then he was followed by Kamala Harris, who is now the Vice President of the United States and is a very, very proud member of very much on I think the far side of her own party's ideology, And so should anybody be surprised when they lean in a certain direction as they author these summary and titles on these ballot statements. And of course, she was followed by Javier Becerra, who's now going on to another job in the federal government. His replacement has already effectively been identified, Rob Monta, assembly member from the East Bay. So I think a combination of things really could truly change that. But information, candid sharing of information with the general public, I think can really truly affect that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John. Okay, I have a two-part question. How many Prop 57 early release parolees become repeat offenders of nonviolent crimes within 12 months, 2 years, 5 years of release, inclusive of the high-profile convicted felon Brock Turner?
You know, I honestly don't know what that number would be. And again, the term nonviolent, think about the veracity of that expression, because Brock Turner was not a violent criminal offender, notwithstanding the fact that he destroyed a woman's life when she was passed out. But he's a nonviolent offender. I know that there's been significant reoffending on the part of those persons that have been relieved. The rate is extremely high. The district attorney in Yolo County, for whatever reason, really jumped on this, Jeff Rising, and identified a recidivism rate that was captured not just from Proposition 57, but into categories, including those persons who were released from custody because of the pandemic and could not be held in custody because we were in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, which is kind of ironic because nursing homes and assisted living centers across the country, obviously there are varying degrees of success, but many of them, I think those that were the most forward thinking, recognized the threat of the pandemic. And so they locked their facilities down, which has been a very, very sad experience for people who are living in those facilities and have not been able to see their families. But in many cases, in fact, right here in this area, many, not all, but many of them were able to keep the COVID-19 virus out of their facilities completely, because they recognized the only portal into and out of those facilities was their own staff, and they could minimize their exposure to the residents there. So that seemed to work. The same thing's true with jails and prisons. The only real variable there, especially with state prisons where people are there for longer periods of time, no fresh arrests coming in, that population is not likely to introduce the virus in the first place. The staff is the likely portal. So again, take specific safeguards and measures to minimize that. But for whatever reason, that was not considered. We pushed inmates out of the institutions at an extraordinary rate. And I'm sorry, I'm at a loss to remember. I think it was in the 90 percentile range of those persons released just in Yolo County that represented the recidivism rate increase there in that county. So I would assume that if you extrapolate that out statewide, it would be something similar to that. Very, very, very high percentage. And just remember this: we take somebody who's prone to misbehave in a pretty serious way, and we lock them up with a group of other people to live in an institution, other people who share that same predisposition, and then at a period of time, not what was prescribed by law, we release them from custody, maybe by a significant reduction in time. Would anybody suspect that they're going to behave any better when they get out? Are they going to perhaps identify ways to continue their path of destruction without getting caught and share secrets, trade secrets, just as good business people do when you get together with a chamber? So I think it's a nightmare that is crystal clear to see. And I regret to tell you that I don't have the hard numbers on it, but suffice to say, I'm satisfied it is high in terms of recidivism from the Prop 57 releases.
Perfect. Thank you, John. What can small business owners do to protect their business from low-level criminal activity?
I think we have to go back to revisit what the system will impose in terms of consequences on those that offend. And so if you're aware of the things that the legislature has done, if you're aware of the things that your fellow voters have done, frankly, I think we have to fan out and work, not necessarily financially, but sometimes it does take financial investment to help spread the word on something that could be very, very important to the success or failure of business. But at the very least, share the message that this is what they're doing. So when you have occasion to interact with other people and you have something like Proposition 47, and I go back to that because to my way of thinking, it was such an absolute bold lie to have the audacity to call that the Safe Neighborhoods and Safe Schools Act when it gives absolutely the opposite, the absolute opposite of that. It puts schools and neighborhoods in a detrimental position. So the ability to call out the truth on that when you interact with people in your spheres of influence, not just limited to the business community, but everybody has neighbors, everybody has fellow parents in the schools, everybody has even your customer base, just to let them know. And I think there's a tendency to get caught up in partisan politics on this. And this is a kind of a new phenomenon, because I'll tell you very candidly, going back over the last several years, when it comes to like governors, for example, that supported the criminal justice effort, Gray Davis was probably the best one I've ever seen in my lifetime. I'm not a fan of the guy, full disclosure, but when it comes to criminal justice support, he was extraordinarily good. Somehow in the last several years, it has taken a partisan shift, but I don't like the idea of focusing on that, because if your business can't run, can't thrive, can't function because you've had such extraordinary loss, and the system does not provide resources to stop that kind of behavior, your partisan affiliation makes no difference. People of all partisan backgrounds and philosophies can be victims of crime and are victims of crime. And the same can be said for people who engage in acts of lawlessness. It's not really a partisan issue, but it's some of life's very, very simple observations. Watch people with their children sometime. And if you hear idle threats that never materialize, you have children that are behaving in a horrible way in a public place, and the parents threaten a timeout or a spanking or whatever the case may be, and the threat is repeated and repeated and repeated, no consequence comes, guess what? That child's going to go on a path of terror and disturb people around them. Well, you've moved that to a more significant experience when you have people engaging in conduct that is an affront to society, and you threaten, because we do have statutory law that works, that can work fairly effectively, but we've lost sight of that. And we find ourselves, I think, very much in a similar position as we were in the 1990s, when you had revolving door justice, and it was not the legislature, it was not the judiciary, it was not the executive branch of government, but rather the voters themselves who said, we're not going to take this anymore. And we did have some developments like 3 strikes and you're out. Was 3 strikes perfect? No. But there was, within 3 strikes, some level of discretion on the part of the prosecutors and the bench to say, okay, look, this was not the legislative intent of the law. This was not the spirit of the law. So we're not going to lock this person up for 25 to life, because that's not the nature of the conduct that they represent. But in general, it gave the system resources to impose consequences and protect society. And so I'm hopeful that at some point the word will get out. The reality is that the people in this program today are among the most informed in the state of California. And that's just a sad reality. People don't know. If you drop these questions on people in your community, they're not going to know anything about this in all probability. The vast majority won't know anything about what we're talking about today. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to help get that message out and cause people to take a stand. Again, look at last November's election. They rejected the prohibition on cash bail. That was a common sense thing, in my opinion, and it prevailed in spite of an enormous degree of support from the political class in California. We rejected affirmative action. I think that's extraordinary. And I'm hopeful that the political class, both within the state of California and the Congress, recognize the fact that people in this ultra blue state of California see that issue a little bit differently than they may be inclined to perceive. Because I think at its core, there are still people who want to see the efforts of a lot of work and commitment pay off. And people who have earned their admission to the universities, people who have put themselves in a position where they're the most qualified for a job are the ones who actually get that job. And so the idea in terms of correcting the disparity that exists, I think has to start very early on, at a very early time in a person's life. For example, the people living in poverty in Oakland, California, rather than throwing meaningless money at them, why not try to redirect those very young people so they can find themselves taking the right steps to get them to where they can be admitted to the University of California and find gainful employment without regard to their race or ethnicity.
Awesome. Thanks, John. The last question that we have for you is, how would you rate the region's response to homelessness?
Well, honestly, I think it's the regions is a good way to look at it because there's disparity within the region. There are a couple of the City of Folsom Police Department has a good outreach program that works to try to help to get people on the right path. I'll tell you very candidly, the Sacramento Sheriff's Department does, and the El Dorado County Sheriff's Department does. They both have HOT teams, homeless outreach teams, I believe is the acronym, and they expend significant resources to try to get people. Not just to provide them with shelter, because that's addressing the symptom of the problem. It's not addressing the root cause. We took a big hit in all of these Western states that are bound by the decisions of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, because historically, in fact, this is, I think it's indefensible in terms of how it's played out, but historically, there was the ability to enforce trespass laws. For example, and this stands today, if you were to go to Lemby Park here in beautiful Folsom and set up a tent or park your RV to camp out for a couple of days or even a night, you're going to be told very quickly you can't do that. That's not the purpose of that park. The city ordinance prohibits that, and therefore you're going to have to move on or be cited and or arrested. Well, there was a matter out of Boise, Idaho, ironically, because they have virtually no homeless problem there. But there was one, at least, and this person was arrested for trespassing in a public area. I believe it was a park, but I'm not certain. It may have been an alley or a sidewalk. And they were convicted in the local court, and they appealed it all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit, in the matter of Martin versus Boise, said, no, unless you have sufficient bed space to shelter, to protect people from the elements, then you shall not, the homeless from the elements, then you shall not arrest or cite them for violating the law. Well, I have a real problem with that because fundamentally I think it violates the equal rights or the equal protection of the law clause of the Constitution. But that's where it stands. So you tax-paying productive members of society are not allowed to camp in the public park, which by the way I think is fine. That's not its intended purpose. But then somebody who invokes homelessness can do so. So I fundamentally, that's a violation of equal protection under the law. However, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear that case. I think it may come back in a different form or fashion and possibly be overturned, but it really did put local governments in a very, very tough position in terms of doing what they have historically done to enforce matters of conduct, not of homelessness. The critics will very quickly assert that it's not a crime to be homeless. Well, it's not. But it is a crime to camp in a restricted area and then to bring along all the attendant behavior that goes with that, because that, sorry if anybody's dining right now, but that becomes their toilet and their bathing facility and everything else. And of course, that is detrimental to public health. So I understand and I appreciate the fact that the Folsom PD is working very, very hard within the constructs of the law, as is the Sheriff's Department in both El Dorado and Sacramento counties. The city of San Diego took a different approach and actually provided shelter, a significant amount of shelter for people that was overwhelmingly unutilized. Nonetheless, because they had that, they were able to enforce the law. So if you think about that for a moment, look back at when did this all change? And I think it's when we started saying, it's not your fault, you can't help it, so go ahead and live that way. And many would assert that they hold those thoughts as a matter of compassion for people. And I look at the folks that I see living on the cold sidewalks, literally urinating and defecating and eating and sleeping in that same little block of geography. And I think, I don't see any compassion there. I have true compassion for those people. And I bet everybody on this call does have true compassion for those people. And sometimes you have to impose a motivation to change behavior. It can be done with a stick and a carrot. You can actually offer an incentive, at the same time say we're not going to allow certain kinds of behavior under penalty of incarceration in their case because they have no assets, but you're going to have an experience you're not going to like. And I think without that, it's going to be a long, slow simmer before we get back to a period of time in which that's not an experience that we have to live with. I believe that's probably among the very first things that any group would bring up in a discussion, the homelessness problem. And ironically, we're losing out on people's ability to live the American dream. I want to see their lives improved and frankly, have them, for their sake, as well as not have them be a part of a specific challenge and threat to public health that they currently present.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to be here today. I want everybody that's on our call to realize that you can actually listen to John daily at 3 p.m. on KFBK 1530 on the AM dial. And once again, thank you so much for being here. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Can I give a shout out to Taryn, who's here in my office and made this system work, without which guys like Joe and me would be out of luck.
Yes. Yes. Great job. Great job. We love it. All right. Thank you so much, John. Again, we greatly appreciate it. I do want to now do our raffle drawing for our $100 gift card to Land Ocean, which is our restaurant sponsor for this meeting today. So I've got everybody's names in here. So let's see who the lucky winner is going to be. Oh my gosh, Mary Beth. Mary Beth is actually one of our chamber ambassadors, and she also was the chair of the committee. And so thank you so much, Mary Beth, for attending, and you now will have a $100 gift card. So that's exciting. All right. I do want to wrap things up. Again, thank you so much to our sponsors. Thank you to Intel. We greatly appreciate them being our presenting sponsor today. Our platinum level sponsors are Kaiser Permanente and Burger Physical Therapy. And once again, our March restaurant partner is Land Ocean. Thank you all so much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.